So as we just heard, President Lee Jae-myung's trip to Canada is set to mark his debut on the global diplomatic stage. For more on what to expect, we're joined by Professor Andrew Millard, an assistant professor of international relations at Changwon National University. Professor Millard, thanks for joining us this morning.
Good morning. Thanks for having me.
Good morning. So, with so much happening around the world right now, what will be at the top of the agenda for the leaders at the G7 summit?
So we can sort of divide this into two main areas. So officially, the top of the agenda was set by the Canadian administration just over a week ago. And I think, as was predicted, security and peace was right at the very top. So we have a few different conflicts going on around the world. Energy security and digital transition was also a part of that. So the use of AI and quantum technology, and also economic security. So those were the official agendas set out just over a week ago. But of course, these summits, these are so important for, as you just mentioned before, the bilateral meetings that also take place, and behind the scenes, a lot of the unofficial meetings where the leaders will really sort of meet with each other and discuss all of the different issues happening. So in particular, I think the US and what is happening with US policies around the world will be a big part of this meeting. And of course, over the past few days, what is happening in Iran and Israel, this is also maybe going to change some of the official agenda.
Right, so this trip to Canada for the G7 summit marks Lee's first overseas trip since taking office, and he said he plans to focus on pragmatic diplomacy. So do you think we'll see that approach in action during this trip?
Oh, for sure. I mean, this is perfect timing. So we have President Lee, he's only taken office less than 2 weeks ago, and now he has not only his first overseas meeting, his first overseas trip, but he's meeting with the G7 leaders, the leaders of the 7 arguably most powerful countries in the world. Plus, we have Australia, India, Brazil, Ukraine, South Africa, all these other leaders as well. So this is really perfect timing for President Lee after that sort of 6-month void to go and meet these world leaders and say, Korea is back on the global stage. These are our foreign policies. These are domestic policies. These are what we're going to follow. However, the leaders, even though they don't really know President Lee very well, they will have done their homework. They will know that in the past, he has been a little bit more critical of Ukraine, of Zelensky himself, and they will know that the Democratic Party in Korea generally tends to be a little bit more pro-China, pro-North Korea, and their relations with the US and Japan are not always as strong as with other governments. So he will definitely have to follow pragmatic diplomacy.
Right. So if President Lee holds a separate bilateral meeting with US President Donald Trump, what key issues do you expect him to discuss there?
So as was mentioned in the short video before, trade. Without doubt, trade and the tariffs, this will be the priority for any sort of meetings that they have. In particular, the steel and aluminium tariffs, these are really going to quite hit South Korea quite hard. But of course, there'll also be talks on security. And like we just said, what is South Korea's policy towards China and North Korea going to look like? So maybe this is where we could see President Lee and President Trump having some sort of common ground. So we know in the past, Donald Trump, he has really liked Kim Jong-un. He's built in the past a good relationship. So maybe this is an area where they can build some good relations. And so when it then goes into those sort of trade negotiations, maybe there can be some room for negotiation. But we'll also look at things like what can South Korea, what can President Lee offer to America in return for reducing those tariffs?
Right, indeed. And there has been growing discussion in recent years about the possibility of South Korea possibly joining the G7. So what's your take on this?
So this one, you're right, this is for about 20 years, just under 20 years, South Korea has been observing in the G7 meetings. I think from 2008, they have been participating. So this issue of whether South Korea should join as a member, it's not a new one. It does have advantages and disadvantages. So the advantage would be politically very symbolically impactful for South Korea. Now, South Korea generally follows the same values and the same policies as most of the other G7 nations, so it's quite westernized in that way. However, if it does become a member, then it needs to think about what would be the reaction from China. So China has in the past been a little bit more critical of the G7 because it is very Western oriented. And as we know, South Korea wants to try to remain sort of a little bit neutral, sort of having good relations with the West, but as we said, also maintaining those good relations with China and the other countries in Asia as well. So it's possible. Would it have a huge impact on South Korea? I'm not so sure, but it could be good for Asia as well.
Right, and the E administration is also considering whether or not if the president should attend the NATO summit later this month. What are your thoughts on this? Do you believe participating in the summit would be beneficial for South Korea?
Without doubt. So this one, I think very strongly over the past few years, especially the past 2 or 3 years, South Korea has really built some good, strong relations with NATO. So through the NATO +4 mechanism, and also last year, for the first time, South Korea joined the ministers' meeting, which was hugely significant. And now, what NATO is looking for, it's looking for reliable partners, partners it can trust with security issues. And so South Korea, it's spent these past few years building this relation. So if South Korea now says, oh, maybe we should join, maybe we shouldn't join, maybe this is going to take away from that reliability. And importantly, especially for Europe right now, they're talking about really boosting their own defense, becoming sort of security autonomous. Now, for South Korea, this could therefore have huge potential for defense trading. So we know back in 2022, there was this huge deal with Poland worth $13 billion for defense expenditure. So we know the Europeans, the NATO countries, they're looking for more countries to boost their defense with. And South Korea, this is really a huge opportunity for them. So yes, they should be at the NATO summit.
All right, Professor Millard, I guess we'll have to see how it goes. I'm afraid that's all the time we have for today. Thank you so much for your insight. We appreciate it.
Okay, thank you.